범죄와 형벌을 쓴 작가는 놀랍게도 20대 중반의 젊은 학자 체살의 베카리아였습니다.
Is anyone willing to give others the right of taking away another's life? Since no one has agreed to that, the punishment of death cannot be justified.
That's exactly what I was thinking.
And when it comes to sentencing, there's always a possibility of an error, as you can see from the Collis case. But you cannot take back the execution of the innocents.
You have a very good point.
And what deters people from offending, it's not the intenseness of the pain, but its continuance. These useless tortures and the death penalty must be abolished. And most importantly, every human life has dignity.
범죄와 형벌은 잔인한 고문과 사형제 폐지를 주장했습니다.
What is the purpose of punishment? The purpose of punishment is to discourage crime. What is the problem with the death penalty? It's not an adequate deterrent. It doesn't discourage crime enough because the execution lasts only a moment and then it's over. We need a long-term example of suffering in order to discourage criminals, so that he was in favor of long-term or lifelong punishment at hard labor, so that everyone would see the criminal over many, many years suffering. He thought that would serve as a greater deterrent. If the penalty for robbery is death, there's no reason for the robber not to kill the victim. If the robber kills the victim, there will be no witness. In fact, by inflicting the death penalty for every variety of offense, we create an incentive to murder, which is a poor idea. Beccariaga attacked all of that.
폭탄 테러가 발생한 노르웨이 수도 오슬로의 중심부 거리.
지난 2011년 7월 노르웨이 오슬로 정부청사 근처에서 폭탄 테러가 일어나 8명이 숨졌습니다. 그리고 그날 오후 우토야 섬에서는 총기 난사 사건으로 69명이 살해당했습니다. 범인은 안데르스 베링 브레이빅이었습니다. 노르웨이 법원은 브레이빅에게 21년형을 선고했습니다. 사형제가 폐지된 노르웨이에서 21년형은 법정 최고형입니다. 이 판결은 형기 만료 후에도 계속 연장이 가능해 종신형이 될 수도 있습니다. 그런데 77명을 살해한 범인에게 21년형은 적당한가? 전 세계적으로 브레이빅의 판결에 대해 관심이 집중됐습니다.
People count the years as if they were the years that the murder victims lost. They think, well, these young people, they lost 50 years each, and this man only has to go to jail for 21 or 22 years. How is this possible? In other places, though, this is regarded as a very, very, very long sentence, and nobody makes the counting in that way. They think, no, we have to be thinking about whether prison will do any good, and whether the function of prison is perhaps to get some improvement in his or in the world's social conditions. And this is very much the way that the Norwegian legal system thinks about it. They ask themselves, what good will come of prison? If it will only make him a more bitter man, if it will only teach him new tricks for carrying out other offenses, if it will only destroy his life and nothing will be gained, why would we do it? So some people will say, no, if it's not retribution and vengeance, then it's not really punishment at all, and we shouldn't send them to prison unless it's really punishment.
사형제에 대해선 나라마다 문화권마다 서로 다른 시각을 보여줍니다. 1786년 이탈리아 토스카나 공국에서 사형제를 폐지한 이래 서유럽 대부분의 국가들이 사형제를 폐지했습니다. 유럽연합은 사형제 폐지를 가입 전제 조건으로 못 받고 있습니다. 우리나라는 1997년 이래 사형 집행이 이루어지지 않아 사실상 사형 폐지국으로 인정되고 있습니다. 잔혹한 신체형은 사라지는 추세고 사형 폐지에 대해서도 사회적으로 치열한 논의가 진행 중입니다. 그런데 내가 피해자라면, 내 가족이나 친구가 지독한 범죄의 피해자라면 어떨까요? 처벌의 정도, 그 범위를 정한다는 건 생각처럼 쉽지 않습니다. 인간의 처벌에 대해 깊이 고민했던 칸트와 베카리아라면 어떤 답을 내놓을까요?
It's totally nonsense. Giving him only 21 years for over 77 murder convictions? Whoever has committed murder must be punished with death.
The death penalty is a denial of the right to life. It should not be violated by law or anything else.
Becaria, your arguments for the abolishment of the death penalty are pure sophistry and a distortion of the principles of right. If an offender has committed murder, he must die, or else his humanity will not be respected. There is no parallel between death and even the most miserable life.
Is it not absurd that the laws which punish homicide commit murder themselves? No man has a right to another's life.
비록 가상의 대화지만 사형제에 대한 칸트와 베카리아의 입장은 정반대입니다.
Beccaria was opposed to the death penalty. He would have insisted on lifelong penal enslavement and hard labor, so that future Breiviks who thought to do such things would see before their eyes the example of a man suffering for his entire life for having done it. I'm sure he would have insisted on the death penalty. It would have only taken one murder for Kant to insist on the death penalty, not 70. I mean, he certainly would have insisted on the death penalty. I think he was quite clear about that.
응보론자인 칸트는 살인은 사형으로 갚아줘야 한다고 강력히 주장했습니다.
There's a famous passage in Kant's Metaphysic of Morals, the second part of which is his general discussion of law, in which he says, offers the following observation. He says, if there were a small society on an island which were planning to dissolve, to cease to exist, the one thing that the members of the society would certainly be obliged to do before dissolving their society would be to execute any murderer in detention, because it's inconceivable that a murderer should not be executed.
If an offender has committed murder, he must die.
No man has a right to another's life.
칸트는 범죄 자체에, 베카리아는 처벌의 목적에 주목했습니다. 우리는 칸트와 베카리아의 시대, 가혹한 처벌이 난무하던 그 시대 상황을 살펴볼 필요가 있습니다.
That the punishments were terribly bloody, so they threatened execution for all sorts of things, and offenders who weren't executed were mutilated in horrible ways. It was common to cut off people's noses, cut off their ears, brand them, do all kinds of things like that. And courts were very reluctant to convict, partly because the punishments were so awful. The kings pardoned people all the time, and it was a very important means of reinforcing royal legitimacy, of demonstrating the king's grace and power to society. It was a big part of royal government.
바로 이 지점에 주목해봐야 합니다. 당시는 가혹한 형벌이 많았지만 사면이란 제도가 있었습니다. 사면은 군주의 은총과 권력을 과시하는 합법적인 수단이었습니다. 법, 그 위에 군림하는 군주가 있었던 겁니다.
What Beccaria objected to and what others objected to was exactly that. They objected to a system in which there is harsh punishments are constantly threatened but rarely carried out. He said it's much more effective to have mild punishments which are certain to be applied rather than severe punishments which are rarely applied. They wanted offenders to know that no matter what, punishment would await them, that there was no hope in appealing to the king for a pardon.
사형제를 찬성하는 칸트도, 사형제에 반대하는 베카리아도 법 위에 군림하는 군주를 반대했습니다. 다만 거부하는 방식이 서로 달랐던 겁니다.
Presque tout le monde a lu des délits et des peines de Beccaria.
L'abolition de la peine de mort est impressionnante.
Personne ne s'est jamais exprimé si clairement sur l'abolition de la peine de mort.
Personne ne met sa vie dans le contrat social. Oui. Et j'ai été très impressionné par l'interdiction de la torture et par l'abolition de la peine de mort.
Est-ce que Beccaria propose d'alléger les peines ?
On ne peut pas interpréter comme ça. Ce qu'il propose, c'est qu'on établisse une loi et que cette loi soit la même pour tous.
D'accord, mais comment allons-nous juger les crimes ? Il demande que la peine corresponde à la gravité du crime.
베카리아는 사형을 비롯해서 잔인한 처벌은 불필요한 고통을 유발한다고 봤습니다. 그렇다면 적당한 처벌의 기준은 어떻게 정할 수 있을까요? 베카리아의 영향을 받은 제러미 벤담은 고통과 쾌락을 기준으로 범죄와 처벌의 균형을 맞춰야 한다고 주장했습니다. 예를 들면 한 인간이 추구하는 쾌락의 크기를 계산하는 겁니다. 상대를 한 대 칠 때 얻는 쾌락의 크기를 1시간 동안 감옥에 갇히는 고통과 동일하다고 본다면 10대를 때리면 10시간보다 약간 더 길게 감옥에 갇혀 있게 하는 겁니다.
Bentham devised a system of punishment. The punishment's an evil, and Bentham's philosophy is intended to minimise evil. When you're punishing people, Bentham wanted the punishment to be proportionate, by which he meant you threatened that amount of punishment which would stop the person from committing the action in question, and just enough to prevent them. Now, if they perform the action anyway, then yes, the amount of punishment outweighed the crime, but the pain from the punishment was supposed to outweigh the gain from the crime, but you use the minimum amount necessary.
상대를 10대 때렸는데 20시간을 감옥에 가둬둔다면 가혹한 처벌입니다. 또 5시간만 가둬둔다면 피해자 입장에서 억울한 처벌이 됩니다. 벤담과 베카리아에게 적절한 형벌이란 형벌의 고통이 범죄로 얻는 쾌락을 약간 넘어서는 정도입니다.
Very badly, but it actually's got the date there, which is I think it goes on and on and on, 60,000 pages like this.
벤담은 적은 비용으로 최대의 효과를 낼 수 있는 효율적인 감옥을 고안했습니다. 파놉티콘입니다.
여기 있군요. panopticon or pan or seeing place.
Yeah.
모두가 볼 수 있는 그런 장소. 모두가 보이는 장소. Area here in the middle, and be able to see to the outside of the circular building, and so you have prison governor in the centre here could see from almost from one place into all the cells.
벤담은 감시가 심할수록 더 바른 행동을 한다고 주장했습니다. 따라서 수감자들이 감시를 받고 있다고 생각하면 더 조심할 거라는 것이 벤담의 생각이었습니다.
And so this is looking down from the top.
Top.
Yeah,
top,
so you can
okay.
so looking down on a plan of the panopticon. So you can see these are the cells around the outside here.
벤담의 파놉티콘은 단순한 건물이 아닙니다. 공리주의적 시각으로 고안해낸 하나의 시스템입니다. 당시 파놉티콘은 상당히 혁신적인 개념이었습니다.
So he set up not just an architectural principle, but also a whole regimen of prison discipline based on the panopticon. And he thought that he could treat the prisoners with greater leniency than in a traditional prison, but he would also get them to work and therefore make a profit from the prison, and at the same time give the prisoners a trade. So he thought that the reason why people were driven into crime was because of idleness. And so he thought that by changing their habits and making them work hard, that he would reform their characters, and when they were released, they would then have a trade and could become ordinary working members of society.
근대적인 감옥이 등장한 것은 형벌의 역사가 진일보하는 계기가 됐습니다. 처벌에서 교화의 개념이 부각된 겁니다.
Because in prison you could have a visual symbol of the offenders being different and being outside society, and yet the offender is also kept safe. And you must not underestimate the importance for the rise of the modern system with prisons of keeping the offender safe from vendetta and feud. A bit like people would now go to football matches. It was an entertainment system. It's hard to imagine. And it's really a great story we can tell about the success of modern justice, that it replaced that.
인간을 처벌한다는 것은 어떤 의미일까요? 처벌은 당연히 범죄 자체에 대한 단죄의 의미가 있습니다. 그리고 범죄를 예방하고 교화하려는 교육의 목적도 있습니다. 그리고 근원적으로 처벌은 범죄와의 균형을 맞추려는 정의의 문제입니다.
Justice is a virtue of human beings and of their institutions. It's the virtue of knowing who gets how much of what. Or who should get this much? Should it be this much or this much? So think about punishment. That's one good example. How much punishment should people get? It's a question of justice because it's a question of allocating a bad thing to a particular person. So judges are expected to be just because in their work every day they must make these terrible decisions, him or her. This much punishment or this much punishment. That's the subject matter of justice.
처벌은 정의의 문제입니다. 그런데 처벌이 정의롭다는 것은 어떤 의미일까요?
The idea of formal equality is the following. Whatever the criminal punishment is, whatever the criminal prohibition may involve, the criminal law should apply equally to all persons without regard to social status. So both the peasant and the lord, and for that matter the king, ought to be subject to exactly the same law. The way they thought they could realize this ideal of formal equality was by insisting on a very, very important principle. If a homicide has been committed, murder has been committed, we ask only whether the defendant committed the murder. We don't ask anything else about what kind of person the defendant is. We don't offer any variation in punishment between different offenders, just as we don't ask whether the one murderer is a duke and the other murderer a merchant or a peasant. We don't ask any of those questions. We focus strictly on the crime and punish the crime the same way every time it is committed.
신분제 타파를 주요 내용으로 하는 프랑스 대혁명과 프랑스 인권선언 이후 전 세계 대부분의 헌법은 법 앞의 평등을 보장하고 있습니다. 모든 국민은 법 앞에 평등하다. 우리 헌법도 누구든지 성별과 종교, 사회적 신분에 의해 정치적, 경제적, 문화적 생활에 있어서 차별을 받지 않는다고 규정하므로 법 앞의 평등을 분명하게 선언하고 있습니다.
평등은 절대적 평등을 의미하는 것이 아니라 배분적 정의에 기초한 상대적 평등을 의미하는 것이고 자의금지 원칙에 의하여 원질적으로 같은 것은 같게 다른 것은 다르게 대하는 그런 평등을 의미합니다. 음주운전의 경우에 같은 수치의 경우에 같은 처벌을 받는 것이 일반적으로 발생하게 되지만은 형식적으로 동일하게 보이는 범죄도 실질적으로는 처벌의 정도나 실질적인 위험의 정도가 달라지게 되기 때문에 결국 이러한 경우에는 배분적 정의가 구현되어서 상이한 처벌을 받게 됩니다.
가끔 우리가 유전무죄, 유권무죄라고 하는 이런 좀 왜곡된 모습들이 나오고 그것에 대해서 많은 비판이 이루어져 왔죠. 더 실질적으로 평등하도록 형벌제도를 더 따듬는 거죠. 그러나 근대 형벌의 지향점은 분명히 법 앞의 평등이면 형벌의 평등을 이야기하고 형벌의 평등은 실질적으로 동등한 효과를 갖는 형벌의 평등을 뜻한다. 이런 방향으로 발전해 가는 거죠.
죄를 지었으면 벌을 받아야 합니다. 그런데 때론 처벌이 너무 가혹하기도 하고 또 때로는 피해자가 억울할 정도로 처벌이 가볍기도 합니다. 범죄와 처벌의 균형점을 찾는 일은 쉽지 않습니다. 법의 내용은 누구에게나 평등하고 법의 적용은 누구에게나 공평해야 합니다. 정당하고 공정한 처벌 기준이 있는 사회야말로 법 앞에 누구나 평등한 사회.